My name is Marlene, and I'm 29 years old. Last month, I thought buying my first house would be the happiest day of my life. I saved for 6 years, worked double shifts, and finally found the perfect little cottage with a white picket fence. But when I called my parents to share the good news, their reaction left me speechless. 3 days later, I received legal papers in the mail. My own parents were taking me to court over my house purchase. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. You won't believe how this family drama unfolds and the nuclear revenge I had to take. Growing up in the Thompson household, I always knew I was different from my older sister Beverly. She was 3 years older than me, but somehow I was always the one expected to be more mature, more responsible, more understanding. Beverly could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, while I seemed to disappoint them just by existing. My father, Harold, worked as an insurance adjuster, and my mother, Agnes, taught part-time at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they managed to provide Beverly with everything her heart desired. Designer clothes, the latest gadgets, a brand new car for her 16th birthday. When my 16th birthday came around, I got a used bicycle from a garage sale. Beverly dropped out of college twice. The first time she claimed the professors didn't understand her creative vision. The second time, it was because her roommate was jealous of her success. Each time she came home defeated, our parents would comfort her, telling her she was too special for that environment anyway. They paid off her student loans both times without a single lecture about responsibility. Meanwhile, I worked my way through state college, taking out loans and working 2 jobs to cover my expenses. When I graduated with a degree in marketing, my parents attended the ceremony, but spent most of the time talking about Beverly's latest business idea. She was going to become a lifestyle influencer, they said. She just needed a little startup money. That startup money turned into Beverly's third failed venture. She had convinced our parents to invest $15,000 in her online boutique, promising them returns within 6 months. The boutique lasted exactly 2 months before Beverly got bored and abandoned it entirely. Once again, our parents just shrugged it off, saying entrepreneurship was risky. At 22, I moved out of the family home and into a tiny studio apartment. I had landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Denver, and I was determined to build my own life. Beverly, now 25, moved back into her childhood bedroom after the boutique failed. Our parents welcomed her with open arms as always. For the next 7 years, I watched this pattern repeat itself. Beverly would announce some grand plan, our parents would fund it, and then she would lose interest when things got difficult. She tried becoming a personal trainer without getting certified, attempted to start a food truck without any culinary experience, and even convinced our parents to pay for an expensive photography course that she never completed. Through all of this, I was building my career and saving every penny I could. My dream was simple. I wanted to own a home. Not a mansion, not something extravagant, just a place that was truly mine. I opened a savings account specifically for this goal and contributed to it religiously every month. I worked overtime whenever it was available, took on freelance projects during weekends, and even picked up a part-time job during the holidays. My social life suffered, my dating life was practically non-existent, but I stayed focused on my goal. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I imagined having my own key to my own front door. 6 years into my savings journey, I had accumulated $45,000 for a down payment. I had been pre-approved for a mortgage and started seriously house hunting. My boyfriend Gerald, whom I had been dating for 2 years, was incredibly supportive. He spent countless weekends driving me to open houses and helping me research neighborhoods. Gerald was everything my family wasn't. He celebrated my achievements, supported my goals, and never made me feel like I was asking for too much. When I showed him my savings account balance, he hugged me and said he was proud of how hard I had worked. It was the first time in my life that someone had recognized my efforts without immediately comparing them to Beverly's supposed potential. The perfect house appeared on the market on a Tuesday morning in March. It was a charming cottage in a quiet suburban neighborhood with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a spacious backyard, perfect for the family Gerald and I hoped to have someday. The asking price was $280,000, right within my budget. I fell in love with the house the moment I walked through the front door. The living room had beautiful hardwood floors and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The kitchen was updated with modern appliances, and the master bedroom was cozy and peaceful. The backyard had mature trees and a small garden area where I could imagine growing vegetables and flowers. Gerald and I spent hours walking through the house talking about where we would put furniture and how we would use each room. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly excited about the future. This house represented everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed to achieve. I submitted an offer that same afternoon, and after some negotiation, it was accepted. The closing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving me time to finalize my mortgage and prepare for the move. I was floating on cloud nine, unable to contain my excitement about finally achieving my dream. The first people I wanted to share the good news with were my parents. Despite our complicated relationship, they were still my family, and I hoped they would be happy for me. I called them immediately after my offer was accepted, practically bouncing with excitement as I waited for them to answer. My mother picked up the phone, and I could barely contain myself as I blurted out the news. I told her about the house, the neighborhood, the price, everything. I was talking so fast that I had to catch my breath. Then I waited for her response, expecting congratulations and excitement to match my own. Instead, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. Finally, my father's voice came on the line. He must have picked up the extension. His first question wasn't about whether I was happy or whether the house was in a good neighborhood. He asked how much it cost. When I told him $280,000, I heard my mother gasp in the background. The conversation went downhill from there. My parents seemed more concerned about the price than about my happiness. They questioned whether I really needed such an expensive house, whether I had thought this through properly, whether I was being responsible with my money. Their reaction was like a bucket of cold water on my excitement. Then Beverly got on the phone. I could hear her in the background asking what was happening, and when my parents explained, she grabbed the phone from them. Her voice was sugary sweet, but there was something underneath it that made me uncomfortable. She congratulated me, but it felt forced and insincere. She kept emphasizing how much money it was, saying things like, "Wow, little sister, quite the big shot now." The phone call ended abruptly when my parents said they needed to go and would talk to me later. I hung up feeling deflated and confused. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life, but my family's reaction had sucked all the joy out of it. Gerald found me sitting on my couch, staring at my phone with tears in my eyes. When I told him about the conversation, he was furious. He couldn't understand why my parents weren't celebrating my achievement instead of questioning my decisions. He reminded me that I had worked harder than anyone he knew to make this dream come true. Over the next few days, I tried to push my family's reaction out of my mind and focus on the exciting details of buying my first home. I scheduled inspections, shopped for homeowners insurance, and started planning the move. Gerald helped me research moving companies and even started looking at furniture for the new place. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My parents' reaction had been so strange, so unsupportive, that I wondered if there was something they weren't telling me. I had no idea that their disapproval was just the beginning of a nightmare that would nearly destroy my life. 2 weeks after I shared the news about my house, my parents called and invited Gerald and me to Sunday dinner. They sounded excited on the phone, almost apologetic about their initial reaction. They said they wanted to hear more about the house and see pictures. I was relieved, thinking they had come to their senses and were ready to be supportive. I spent the morning printing out photos of the house and gathering paint samples and decorating magazines to share with them. Gerald and I arrived at their house carrying a folder full of everything I wanted to show them. I was genuinely excited to share my vision for making the house into our future home. Beverly was already there when we arrived, sitting at the dining room table, looking unusually pleased about something. She greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I noticed she kept exchanging glances with our parents throughout the meal. There was an undercurrent of tension in the room that I couldn't identify. Dinner was pleasant enough with normal conversation about work and the weather. I showed them all the photos of the house, pointing out my favorite features and explaining my decorating plans. Gerald added details about the neighborhood and the good schools nearby. My parents looked at everything, politely nodding and making appropriate comments. After we finished eating, my father cleared his throat in that way he did when he had something important to say. He and my mother exchanged a meaningful look, and then he leaned forward with his hands clasped on the table. His expression was serious, almost grave, as if he was about to deliver bad news. He started by saying that they had been thinking a lot about my house purchase over the past few weeks. He said they were concerned about my future and wanted to make sure I was making the right decisions. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. They needed to discuss my house situation and what it meant for the family. My mother jumped in then, talking about how they had been thinking about Beverly's future and her need for stability. She talked about how Beverly had been struggling to find her path in life and how she needed something solid to build on. I was starting to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but I still didn't understand where this was going. Then Beverly spoke up, and her voice had a whiny little girl quality that I hadn't heard since we were children. She talked about how she had always dreamed of having a house like the one I had bought. She said it was exactly the kind of place she had pictured herself living, with the garden and the cozy rooms and the quiet neighborhood. That's when my father dropped the bombshell. He said that after discussing it as a family, they had come up with what they considered a fair solution. They thought I should give Beverly the house. Not sell it to her, not let her rent it from me. Give it to her. Transfer the deed, walk away from my mortgage, and hand over everything I had worked 6 years to achieve. I sat there staring at them, waiting for someone to say they were joking. When no one did, I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. Gerald's hand found mine under the table and squeezed it tightly. I could feel him tensing up beside me, but he stayed quiet, letting me handle my family. My mother started explaining their reasoning as if it made perfect sense. She said I was young and could save up again for another house. She pointed out that Beverly was older and needed stability more than I did. She talked about family loyalty and helping each other out during difficult times. She made it sound like refusing their request would be selfish and cruel. My father added that I had always been the strong one, the responsible one, the one who could bounce back from disappointments. He said Beverly was more fragile and needed this opportunity more than I did. He reminded me of all the times they had taught me to share when we were children, as if this situation was comparable to sharing toys in a sandbox. I finally found my voice and told them this was insane. I explained that I had worked 6 years to save for this house, that I had made countless sacrifices, that this was my dream and my achievement. I reminded them that Beverly had never shown any interest in home ownership before, had never saved a penny toward such a goal, and had no way to take over mortgage payments. Beverly immediately started crying, saying that she never got anything nice, that everything always went to me, that it wasn't fair. My mother jumped to comfort her, stroking her hair and telling her that everything would work out. My father looked at me with disappointment, saying he had raised me to be more generous and family-oriented than this. The conversation escalated quickly from there. Beverly was sobbing dramatically, talking about how hard her life had been and how much she deserved something good for once. My parents were taking turns lecturing me about family values and making sacrifices for the people you love. They made me sound like a monster for wanting to keep the house I had bought with my own money. I stood up from the table, barely able to contain my anger and disbelief. Gerald stood with me, putting his arm around my shoulders in support. I told my parents that what they were asking was completely unreasonable and that I would never give up my house. I said I couldn't believe they would even suggest such a thing. That's when my father's tone changed completely. His voice became cold and threatening as he said that if I wouldn't reconsider their reasonable request, they would be forced to take action. He said they wouldn't stand by and watch me destroy family relationships over a piece of property. He said they had options and wouldn't hesitate to use them. I didn't understand what he meant by taking action, but something in his tone made me genuinely frightened. Gerald pulled me toward the door, saying we needed to leave. My parents made no attempt to stop us or smooth things over. Beverly just sat there smirking as if she knew something I didn't. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my shaky breathing. Gerald kept glancing over at me, clearly worried about how I was handling everything. When we got to my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and finally let myself cry. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down in the span of one conversation. Gerald held me while I sobbed, telling me over and over that my parents' behavior was completely unreasonable. He said he had never heard of anything so outrageous that no normal family would make such a demand. He reminded me that I had done nothing wrong and that I had every right to keep the house I had earned. When I called my best friend Janet later that night to tell her what had happened, she was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, she said she thought I must be exaggerating because no parents would actually demand their child give up their home for a sibling. It took me 20 minutes to convince her I was telling the truth. Over the next few days, my parents called constantly, each time presenting what they called reasonable compromise suggestions. Maybe Beverly could live in the house and make payments directly to me. Maybe I could rent it to her at a reduced rate. Maybe we could co-own it and take turns living there. Each suggestion was more ridiculous than the last. Beverly started a passive-aggressive social media campaign posting vague messages about family loyalty and ungrateful siblings. She shared inspirational quotes about helping those in need and making sacrifices for love. Anyone who knew our family would understand exactly who she was targeting with these posts. I finally blocked all of them on social media and stopped answering their phone calls. I needed to focus on my house closing, which was coming up in just a few weeks. I tried to push their bizarre demands out of my mind and concentrate on the exciting milestone I was about to reach. But deep down, I was scared. My father's threat about taking action kept replaying in my mind. I had no idea what he meant, but I knew my parents well enough to know they wouldn't give up easily. They had never accepted no for an answer when it came to Beverly's wants and needs. I was about to learn exactly what they meant by taking action, and it would be more devastating than anything I could have imagined. Despite the ongoing drama with my family, moving day arrived with a mixture of excitement and relief. Gerald took the day off work to help me, and we spent the morning loading boxes into a rented truck. My tiny studio apartment didn't hold much, but every item represented my independence and my journey toward this moment. The cottage looked even more perfect when I walked through it, with my own key in my hand. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room windows, illuminating the hardwood floors that would soon hold my furniture. Gerald and I worked together to bring in my belongings, and despite the modest amount I owned, the house immediately started to feel like home. That evening we celebrated with takeout Chinese food, eaten sitting on the floor of my new living room. Gerald had brought candles, and we dined by candlelight surrounded by moving boxes, talking about our plans for each room. It was one of the most romantic evenings of my life, made even more special by the knowledge that this was truly my space. The next few days were filled with the joy of settling in. My new neighbors, an elderly couple named Frank and Dorothy, brought over homemade cookies and welcomed me to the neighborhood. The mailman introduced himself and commented on how nice it was to see a young person investing in the community. Every interaction reinforced my feeling that I had made the right choice. I was so happy that I decided to share just one photo on social media. It was a simple picture of my living room with the caption, "Finally home." I thought it was innocent enough, just a quiet celebration of achieving my dream. I had no idea it would be like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Beverly's comment appeared within minutes, "Nice stolen dream." I deleted it immediately, but the damage was done. She had made her position clear, and I knew this was far from over. Still, I was determined not to let her bitterness steal my joy. 3 days later, I was unpacking kitchen boxes when I heard the mail truck outside. I had been expecting various pieces of mail related to home ownership, so I walked out to check the mailbox without thinking much about it. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a certified letter that required my signature. I assumed it was something related to my homeowner's insurance or maybe a final document from the mortgage company. I signed for it and brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter while I made myself a cup of coffee. I was in such a good mood that even official-looking mail couldn't dampen my spirits. When I finally opened the envelope, the first thing I saw was the header, Thompson versus Thompson. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw my name listed as the defendant and my parents' names listed as the plaintiffs. I had to read it 3 times before the reality sank in. My own parents were suing me. They were actually taking me to court over my house. The legal document was filled with official language that was difficult to understand, but the basic claim was clear. They were alleging fraudulent property acquisition and demanding that the house be transferred to Beverly as the rightful beneficiary. I collapsed right there on my kitchen floor, still holding the papers in my shaking hands. This couldn't be real. Parents didn't sue their own children over houses they had bought with their own money. This was the kind of thing you heard about on daytime television, not something that happened to real people with normal families. The document listed various claims that made no sense to me. They alleged that I had used family resources without permission to purchase the house. They claimed that Beverly had an equal right to any property acquired by family members. They argued that my purchase had caused emotional distress to Beverly and disrupted family harmony. Every claim was either completely false or twisted beyond recognition. Yes, my parents had helped with my education, but that was normal parental support, not a loan that needed to be repaid with real estate. Yes, Beverly was upset, but that was because she wanted something that didn't belong to her, not because I had done anything wrong. When Gerald arrived after work and found me still sitting on the kitchen floor with the papers scattered around me, he immediately knew something terrible had happened. I couldn't even speak at first, just handed him the legal documents and watched his expression change from confusion to shock to outrage. Gerald is normally a calm, measured person, but I had never seen him as angry as he was in that moment. He kept reading sections of the lawsuit out loud, his voice getting louder and more incredulous with each claim. He called it the most ridiculous thing he had ever seen and said no judge in their right mind would take it seriously. Janet arrived an hour later with wine and tissues, having rushed over as soon as Gerald called her. The 3 of us sat in my new living room, reading through every page of the lawsuit and trying to make sense of the legal language. Janet, who worked as a paralegal, explained some of the terminology, but admitted she had never seen a family case quite like this one. The worst part was realizing how much thought and planning had gone into this lawsuit. My parents hadn't filed it in anger or desperation. They had clearly consulted with a lawyer, gathered documents, and prepared their case over several weeks. The timing was particularly cruel, waiting until after I had closed on the house and moved in to deliver the devastating blow. The financial implications started to sink in as we discussed the situation. Even if I won the case, which seemed likely given the frivolous nature of the claims, I would still have to pay for legal representation. Janet estimated that defending against the lawsuit could cost $15,000 to $20,000 money that I had just spent on my house down payment and moving expenses. My parents knew exactly what they were doing. They were counting on the fact that I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, hoping I would settle out of court by giving Beverly what she wanted. It was financial warfare disguised as a family dispute, and they were willing to destroy my life to get their way. The emotional toll was even worse than the financial concerns. I felt betrayed in a way I had never experienced before. These were the people who were supposed to love and support me, and instead they were trying to take away everything I had worked for. The house that should have been my sanctuary had become the center of a legal nightmare. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside made me wonder if process servers were coming with more legal papers. Every phone ring made me jump, afraid it might be more bad news. My beautiful new home felt tainted by the knowledge that my own family was trying to take it away from me. The next morning brought even worse news. Beverly had apparently told everyone in our extended family her version of the story, painting me as a selfish sister who refused to help family. My phone was full of voicemails from aunts, uncles, and cousins, some supporting me, but others questioning why I couldn't just be more generous. My reputation at work started to suffer as news of the lawsuit spread. Some coworkers were sympathetic, but others began treating me differently as if being sued by my own parents was a reflection of my character. I overheard whispered conversations about family drama and wondered how many people believed I must have done something wrong. The isolation was crushing. Just when I should have been celebrating the biggest achievement of my life, I found myself defending my character and my choices to everyone around me. My parents had turned my dream house into a symbol of family conflict, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to enjoy it again. But I was determined not to let them win. I had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to give up without a fight. The next step was finding a lawyer who could help me navigate this legal nightmare and hopefully put an end to my family's outrageous demands once and for all. Gerald insisted that I hire a lawyer immediately, even though the expense would strain my budget significantly. He had researched family law attorneys in Denver and found one named Richard Morrison who specialized in unusual family disputes. Gerald offered to help with the legal costs, but I was determined to handle this situation myself, just as I had handled everything else in my life. Richard's office was in a downtown high-rise, and I felt intimidated walking into the gleaming lobby. I had never needed a lawyer before, and the whole experience felt surreal. When I explained my situation to Richard, I could see his eyebrows raise higher with each detail. By the time I finished, he was shaking his head in disbelief. Richard had been practicing family law for 20 years, but he said he had never encountered a case quite like mine. He reviewed the lawsuit documents carefully, making notes and occasionally muttering under his breath about the absurdity of the claims. When he finished reading, he looked up at me with a mixture of sympathy and professional determination. He explained that while the lawsuit was clearly frivolous, frivolous didn't mean harmless. The legal process would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. He estimated that defending against the case would cost between $15,000 and $20,000, assuming it didn't drag on for months with appeals and complications. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had saved $45,000 for my house down payment over 6 years of sacrifice and hard work. Now I was facing the prospect of spending nearly half that amount just to defend my right to keep what I had earned. My parents had found the perfect way to punish me financially for refusing their demands. Richard explained the legal strategy we would need to pursue. We would file a motion to dismiss the case as frivolous present documentation of my independent finances and possibly countersue for legal fees and damages. He warned me that family lawsuits could be particularly nasty because the opposing parties knew exactly how to hurt each other emotionally. Over the next few weeks, I gathered every piece of financial documentation I could find. Bank statements, tax returns, employment records, student loan documents, credit card statements. I needed to prove that every penny used to buy my house had come from my own earnings and savings with no contribution from my parents. The process of compiling evidence was both tedious and depressing. Each document told the story of my financial independence, the modest salary from my first job, the gradual increases. As I proved myself at work, the consistent deposits into my savings account, the careful budget management that allowed me to save for my dream. Meanwhile, my parents continued their harassment campaign. They called my workplace asking to speak to my supervisor about my character and reliability. They contacted my mortgage company claiming there had been fraud in the application process. They even called my homeowner's insurance company suggesting that I might not be a trustworthy policyholder. Beverly escalated her social media campaign, posting long rants about ungrateful family members and sharing articles about sibling rivalry and inheritance disputes. She portrayed herself as the victim of my success, as if my achievements somehow diminished her worth. Her posts gained sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. the stress began affecting my work performance. I was distracted during meetings, made mistakes on projects I normally handled easily, and found it difficult to concentrate on anything besides the lawsuit. My supervisor called me into her office to express concern about my recent performance and ask if there was anything the company could do to help. I was torn between wanting to explain the situation and wanting to keep my personal problems separate from my professional life. I decided to give her a brief overview of the family legal issue, emphasizing that it wouldn't affect my work long term. She was sympathetic, but clearly concerned about the potential impact on our clients and projects. 3 months after receiving the initial lawsuit documents, we finally had our day in court. I had never been inside a courtroom before, and the formal atmosphere was intimidating. My parents arrived with Beverly and their lawyer, all dressed in their most conservative outfits. They wouldn't make eye contact with me, treating me like a stranger rather than their daughter. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Word had spread through our community about the unusual case, and several neighbors, extended family members, and even some coworkers had come to observe the proceedings. I felt like I was on trial, not just legally but socially, with everyone judging my character based on my family's accusations. My parents' lawyer presented their case first, painting me as a selfish daughter who had abandoned family values in pursuit of material success. He argued that my parents had invested years of love, support, and financial resources in raising me, and that this investment entitled them to some consideration in my major financial decisions. The lawyer claimed that my parents had specifically discussed their intention to help both daughters achieve homeownership, and that my unilateral decision to purchase a house had violated this family understanding. He suggested that transferring the house to Beverly would restore family harmony and honor the parents' wishes for equal treatment of their children. Beverly took the witness stand wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, presenting herself as the responsible older daughter who had been unfairly overlooked. She spoke softly, dabbing at her eyes with tissues as she described feeling abandoned and excluded by my success. She claimed that our parents had promised to help her buy a house someday, and that my purchase had ruined those plans. Beverly's testimony was filled with half-truths and emotional manipulation. She talked about struggling to find her place in life while watching me achieve success after success. She made it sound like I had stolen opportunities that rightfully belonged to her, rather than acknowledging that I had worked for everything I achieved. My father's testimony was the most painful to hear. He spoke about his disappointment in my selfishness and my failure to consider family needs before making major decisions. He claimed that they had only sued me as a last resort, after I refused to consider reasonable compromises that would help Beverly achieve stability. Harold painted himself as a loving father trying to help both daughters succeed, rather than acknowledging the years of favoritism and enabling that had led to this situation. He made my refusal to give up my house sound like a betrayal of everything he had taught me about family loyalty and generosity. My mother's testimony was similarly manipulative. Agnes cried on the witness stand as she talked about the pain of watching her daughters fight over material possessions. She claimed that all they wanted was for both daughters to be happy and successful, making it sound like my refusal to surrender my house was preventing Beverly's happiness. The most infuriating part of their testimonies was how they twisted normal parental responsibilities into special favors that deserved repayment. They made it sound like feeding me, clothing me, and helping with my education were investments, rather than basic parental duties. They acted as if my success was somehow borrowed from them rather than earned through my own efforts. When it came time for my defense, Richard presented a clear timeline of my financial independence and home buying process. He showed bank statements proving that every dollar of the down payment had come from my personal savings. He presented employment records showing my career progression and salary increases over the years. Gerald testified as a character witness describing my work ethic and dedication to achieving homeownership. He explained how he had watched me make sacrifices for years to save for my house, giving up vacations, entertainment, and shopping to reach my goal. His testimony highlighted the personal cost of my achievement. Janet also testified on my behalf, describing the years she had watched me work toward my dream. She explained how excited I had been about finally achieving homeownership and how devastated I was when my parents sued me. Her testimony helped humanize me after my family's attempts to paint me as selfish and ungrateful. The most powerful part of our defense was the financial documentation itself. The numbers told a clear story of independence and responsibility. Every paycheck deposited, every monthly contribution to savings, every careful budget decision was documented in black and white. There was no ambiguity about where the money had come from. After 2 days of testimony, the judge called a recess to review the evidence and prepare his decision. Those few hours of waiting felt like the longest of my life. My future hung in the balance, dependent on whether a stranger would see through my family's manipulation and recognize the truth of my situation. When court reconvened, the judge's expression was stern as he addressed both parties. He called the lawsuit frivolous and without merit, noting that adult children have no obligation to share their earned assets with siblings. He dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning my parents couldn't file the same claims again. The judge also ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, recognizing that they had filed a baseless lawsuit that caused significant financial harm to me. It was a complete victory legally, but the emotional damage had already been done. My relationship with my family was destroyed, and my reputation in the community had been severely damaged. As we left the courthouse, I felt relief but also profound sadness. I had won the battle, but at the cost of losing my family forever. The house I had worked so hard to buy was still mine, but it would always be associated with this painful legal fight, rather than the joy I had originally felt. The local newspaper picked up the story, running an article titled "Family Fights Over Dream House in Court," that included photos of me and details about the case. While the article was factually accurate and portrayed me sympathetically, seeing my personal business splashed across the local news was humiliating. Some clients at work requested different account managers after reading about the lawsuit, concerned about being associated with someone involved in such public family drama. My professional reputation suffered, even though I had been the victim rather than the perpetrator of the legal action. Despite winning in court, I realized that my parents and Beverly would probably never accept the judge's decision. They had shown themselves capable of extreme behavior, and I doubted they would simply give up and leave me alone. I was about to discover just how right I was about their inability to let go. I naively hoped that losing in court would finally convince my parents to accept reality and leave me alone. The judge had been crystal clear in his decision, calling their lawsuit frivolous and ordering them to pay my legal fees. I thought surely this public humiliation would be enough to end their campaign against me. I was wrong. If anything, the court loss seemed to make them more determined to punish me for refusing to give Beverly my house. Within days of the judge's ruling, they began a new phase of harassment that was somehow even more disturbing than the lawsuit itself. My father called my office repeatedly, asking to speak with my supervisor about my character and work performance. He told anyone who would listen that I was dishonest and unreliable, that I had stolen from my family, and that I couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. My boss finally had to block his number and send a formal cease and desist letter. My mother started spreading rumors throughout our small community, telling neighbors and acquaintances that I had cheated my sister out of her rightful inheritance. She painted Beverly as a victim of my greed and manipulation, conveniently leaving out the years of enabling and favoritism that had created this situation in the first place. Beverly's social media campaign reached new levels of vindictiveness. She posted long rants about ungrateful siblings who abandon family values for material success. She shared articles about narcissistic family members and inheritance disputes, clearly targeting me with each post. Her followers, who only knew her version of events, responded with sympathy and outrage on her behalf. The harassment extended beyond social media. Beverly started showing up at places where she knew I would be creating uncomfortable scenes designed to embarrass me in public. She appeared at my grocery store, my gym, even my favorite restaurant, always managing to insert herself into my space with dramatic displays of victimhood. They filed frivolous appeals to the court decision, forcing me to spend more money on legal fees, even though the appeals had no merit. Richard explained that they were probably trying to exhaust my financial resources, hoping I would eventually give in just to make the harassment stop. Each new legal filing, each harassing phone call, each public scene chipped away at my emotional reserves. I had won the court case, but I felt like I was losing the war. My beautiful house had become a prison surrounded by the constant threat of my family's retaliation. Gerald was incredibly supportive throughout this ordeal, but I could see the stress affecting him too. He worried about me constantly checking in multiple times during workdays and insisting on staying over most nights in case my parents tried to escalate their harassment. Our relationship was strong, but the constant drama was taking its toll. One evening, while organizing my financial documents for yet another legal response, I discovered something that would change everything. I was going through old tax returns trying to find documentation Richard needed for our counter-harassment case when I noticed some discrepancies in my parents' reported income. My father worked as an insurance adjuster, a job that typically paid around $50,000 per year in our area. My mother taught part-time, earning perhaps $15,000 annually. Yet somehow they maintained a lifestyle that seemed far beyond their reported means. They owned expensive cars, took luxury vacations, and had always been able to fund Beverly's various failed ventures without apparent financial strain. Curious, I asked Gerald to help me research public records about my parents' finances. What we discovered was shocking. My father owned 3 rental properties that he had never mentioned to the family. These properties generated significant monthly income that somehow wasn't reflected in the modest lifestyle they claimed to maintain. Further investigation revealed a pattern of financial deception that went back years. Harold had been claiming false deductions on his taxes, reporting personal expenses as business costs, and underreporting his rental income. The IRS would be very interested in this information, especially since he had testified in court about his modest financial circumstances. Agnes had been collecting unemployment benefits while working under-the-table jobs, a form of benefits fraud that could result in serious legal consequences. She had also been reporting lower income than she actually earned, avoiding taxes on thousands of dollars of unreported earnings. Most shocking of all was Beverly's situation. She had been collecting disability payments for a supposed back injury that prevented her from working while simultaneously posting photos on social media of herself, hiking, dancing, and engaging in activities that would be impossible for someone with a legitimate disability. The hypocrisy was staggering. These were the people who had sued me for being dishonest, who had claimed I was stealing from the family and acting without integrity. Meanwhile, they had been committing actual crimes for years, defrauding government agencies and cheating on their taxes while living off the proceeds. I sat in my living room with Gerald, surrounded by printed documents and public records, trying to process what we had discovered. My parents had destroyed our family relationship and put me through legal hell while engaging in systematic fraud themselves. The projection was breathtaking in its audacity. Gerald suggested that I could report them to the appropriate authorities, but I was torn. Despite everything they had done to me, these were still my parents. Was I really prepared to potentially send them to jail over their financial crimes? Could I live with myself if my actions resulted in their imprisonment? But then I remembered my father's cold voice threatening to take action if I didn't give up my house. I thought about the months of harassment, the legal fees, the damage to my reputation and career. I recalled Beverly's smug expression in the courtroom and her ongoing campaign to destroy my character on social media. They had shown me no mercy when they tried to take everything I had worked for. They had been willing to destroy my life, my finances, and my future to satisfy Beverly's sense of entitlement. Why should I show them the consideration they had never shown me? That night I made copies of all the evidence Gerald and I had compiled. Tax documents, bank statements, social media posts, public records, everything that proved their pattern of fraud and deception. I organized it all into neat files, one for each relevant government agency. Richard reviewed my evidence and confirmed that I had solid documentation of multiple crimes. He explained the reporting process and the likely consequences my parents would face if investigations confirmed what the documents suggested. He also warned me that taking this step would permanently end any possibility of family reconciliation. I thought about that warning for days. Did I really want to destroy my parents' lives the way they had tried to destroy mine? Was revenge worth the moral cost of turning my own family over to federal investigators? Then I remembered something my father had said during his court testimony. He had claimed that all they wanted was to teach me about family loyalty and the importance of helping those in need. He had painted their lawsuit as a loving attempt to guide me toward better values. The evidence in front of me told a different story. This wasn't about family values or helping Beverly achieve stability. This was about entitlement manipulation and a decades-long pattern of fraud and deception. They weren't trying to teach me anything. They were trying to steal from me while committing crimes themselves. My decision was made. If they wanted to play hardball with legal consequences, I would show them what real legal consequences look like. They had started this war when they sued me for buying a house with my own money. Now they were going to discover that their own house of cards was built on much shakier ground than mine had ever been. I spent the next week carefully preparing comprehensive reports for each relevant government agency. The Internal Revenue Service would be interested in Harold's unreported rental income and fraudulent business deductions. The Social Security Administration needed to know about Beverly's disability fraud. The State Labor Department would want to investigate Agnes's unreported income and unemployment fraud. Each report was meticulously documented with bank statements, tax returns, social media screenshots, and public records. I included a detailed timeline of their criminal activities and cross-referenced everything with official documents. If I was going to do this, I wanted to make sure the evidence was irrefutable. Richard reviewed each report before I submitted them, confirming that the documentation was solid and the allegations were serious enough to warrant investigation. He reminded me again that this action would have permanent consequences for my family relationships, but I had already made peace with that reality. The hardest part was accepting that I was essentially orphaning myself. Once I submitted these reports, there would be no going back to family dinners or holiday celebrations. I would be cutting myself off from my parents, Beverly, and probably most of our extended family who would view my actions as unforgivable betrayal. But I thought about Gerald's family who had welcomed me with open arms and treated me like the daughter they never had. I thought about the family we hoped to create together built on honesty and mutual support, rather than manipulation and favoritism. I realized that sometimes you have to lose your family of origin to find your real family. On a Tuesday morning in September, I submitted all 3 reports electronically and by certified mail. Each agency confirmed receipt of my complaints and assigned case numbers for follow-up. The investigations would take months to complete, but the wheels of justice were finally in motion. For the first time in almost a year, I felt a sense of peace. I had done everything I could to defend myself and my rights. Now it was up to the proper authorities to determine whether my parents' actions warranted criminal charges or civil penalties. Gerald and I decided to focus on positive aspects of our life together. We started planning our wedding, looking at venues and discussing guest lists. We talked about the family we wanted to create and the values we would instill in our children. We painted bedrooms in my house and planted flowers in the backyard garden. 2 months passed without any contact from my parents or Beverly. I began to hope that maybe they had finally given up their harassment campaign and decided to leave me alone. I should have known better than to expect such a reasonable response from people who had already proven themselves capable of extreme behavior. The first domino fell on a cold November morning when Harold received an official audit notice from the IRS. According to the letter, his tax returns for the past 5 years were being examined for potential discrepancies and unreported income. He was required to provide extensive documentation within 30 days. Harold panicked immediately. He called me for the first time since the court case, his voice shaky and desperate, as he begged for help understanding the audit process. He claimed he didn't know why he was being investigated and asked if I knew any tax attorneys who could represent him. I listened to his pleading voice with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the same man who had coldly threatened to take legal action against me if I didn't give up my house. Now he was begging for my help when facing his own legal problems. The irony was not lost on me. I politely declined to help him, suggesting that he hire a qualified accountant to review his tax situation and determine the best course of action. I kept my voice neutral and professional, giving him no indication that I had any knowledge of why he might be under investigation. The audit revealed exactly what I had expected. Harold owed $75,000 in unpaid taxes and penalties for 5 years of unreported rental income and fraudulent deductions. The IRS also imposed additional fines for what they classified as willful tax evasion rather than innocent mistakes. Harold was forced to sell 2 of his 3 rental properties to pay the tax debt. The family's comfortable lifestyle came crashing down as they struggled to meet their obligations to the federal government. Agnes had to take a second job to help cover their basic living expenses. Beverly's disability fraud investigation took longer to complete, but the results were equally devastating. The Social Security Administration determined that she had fraudulently collected over $30,000 in disability payments while fully capable of working. She was required to repay the entire amount and faced potential criminal charges. For the first time in her adult life, Beverly was forced to get a real job. She found employment at a fast food restaurant working minimum wage while trying to figure out how to repay her debt to the government. Her social media posts changed dramatically from victim narratives to complaints about having to work for a living. Agnes's unemployment fraud investigation was the quickest to resolve. The state labor department determined that she had collected benefits while working under the table, owing nearly $10,000 in fraudulent payments, plus penalties and interest. She faced potential criminal prosecution for benefits fraud. The cascade of legal and financial problems destroyed my parents' comfortable retirement plans. Harold lost his insurance adjuster license due to the criminal investigation and had to find work in a completely different field. Agnes's teaching position was terminated when the school district learned about her legal troubles. Within 6 months of my reports, my parents had gone from comfortable middle-class retirees to struggling working-class people dealing with massive debt and potential criminal charges. Their house went into foreclosure, forcing them to move into a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. Beverly had to move out of the family home and find her own place for the first time in years. She rented a studio apartment and continued working at the restaurant while making monthly payments toward her debt. Her expensive lifestyle disappeared overnight, replaced by the reality of living paycheck to paycheck. The local newspaper covered their legal troubles just as they had covered our family lawsuit. The headline read, "Local family faces multiple fraud investigations," and detailed the various charges and financial penalties each family member was facing. The article mentioned that the investigations had been triggered by a family member's complaints. Extended family members who had initially supported my parents in the house dispute began to distance themselves as the extent of the fraud became public. People who had criticized me for being selfish toward Beverly suddenly understood that there was much more to the story than they had been told. My parents made several desperate attempts to contact me during this period, alternating between angry accusations that I had destroyed their lives and tearful pleas for forgiveness and help. I maintained my boundaries and refused to engage with their emotional manipulation. Beverly left a voicemail calling me every name she could think of, blaming me for ruining her life and threatening to find some way to get revenge. I saved the recording in case I needed it for a restraining order, but I didn't respond to her threats or accusations. The most satisfying moment came when Harold showed up at my house unannounced, begging me to somehow call off the investigations he was facing. He seemed to genuinely believe that I could make phone calls and undo months of federal investigation work. His desperation was both pathetic and fitting. I calmly explained to Harold that I couldn't control government investigations any more than I could control his decision to commit tax fraud for years. I reminded him that these were consequences of his own actions, not anything I had done to him. I suggested that he focus on taking responsibility rather than blaming others. When he continued to plead and make demands, I called the police and had him removed from my property. The officers issued him a warning about trespassing and advised him to stay away from my house. It was the last time I saw my father in person. The criminal cases against my parents were eventually resolved through plea agreements. Harold pled guilty to tax evasion and received 2 years of probation plus community service. Agnes pled guilty to benefits fraud and received 1 year of probation. Beverly pled guilty to disability fraud and received 18 months of probation. None of them received jail time, but their criminal records made finding decent employment difficult. The financial penalties continued to affect their standard of living for years. They had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, even when you've spent years avoiding responsibility. Looking back on this period, I felt no guilt about reporting their crimes. They had brought these consequences on themselves through years of fraudulent behavior. My reports had simply ensured that they faced the same legal accountability they had tried to impose on me when I bought my house with honest money. The months following my parents' legal troubles were strangely peaceful for me. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't dealing with family drama demands for money or support, or emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for my success. The silence was initially unsettling, but gradually became a source of strength. I started seeing a therapist to help me process the trauma of the past year and understand the dysfunctional family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. Dr. Susan helped me recognize patterns of favoritism, scapegoating, and emotional abuse that I had normalized because they were all I had ever known. Through therapy, I learned about narcissistic family systems and my role as the scapegoat child who was blamed for family problems, while Beverly served as the golden child who could do no wrong. Understanding these dynamics helped me realize that my parents' behavior toward me wasn't personal. It was part of a systematic pattern of dysfunction. Dr. Susan helped me work through the guilt I felt about reporting my parents' crimes. I had been raised to believe that family loyalty meant accepting abuse and enabling bad behavior. But therapy taught me that real love sometimes requires setting boundaries and allowing people to face consequences for their actions. Gerald was incredibly supportive throughout my healing process. He attended some therapy sessions with me and worked to understand how my family experiences had affected my ability to trust and form healthy relationships. His patience and consistency helped me learn what genuine love and support looked like. Gerald's parents, Frank and Mary, essentially adopted me as their daughter during this time. They included me in family gatherings, asked my opinion on family decisions, and supported my career goals without expecting anything in return. They showed me what healthy family dynamics looked like, based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. My relationship with Gerald deepened as we worked through the challenges of the past year together. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and stood by me through every crisis. When he proposed on Christmas Eve, sitting in front of the fireplace in our home, I knew I was ready to build a new kind of family based on love and honesty. Planning our wedding became a joyful process that helped me focus on the future rather than dwelling on past family trauma. We decided to have the ceremony in our backyard, surrounded by the people who genuinely cared about us, rather than those who felt obligated to attend out of family duty. My career flourished once I was no longer distracted by constant family crises. I earned a promotion to senior marketing manager and began mentoring younger employees who reminded me of myself at their age. I found satisfaction in helping others navigate workplace challenges and achieve their professional goals. The house that had been the center of so much conflict became a true sanctuary. Gerald and I spent weekends working in the garden, hosting dinner parties for our real friends, and creating the kind of home environment we had both dreamed of having. Every room held memories of joy rather than trauma. 2 years after the initial lawsuit, I received an unexpected letter from Harold. It was handwritten on plain paper, very different from the legal documents that had characterized our previous communications. In it, he apologized for everything that had happened and acknowledged that they had been completely wrong to sue me. Harold's letter explained that losing everything had forced him to examine his behavior and values for the first time in years. He admitted that they had enabled Beverly's irresponsible behavior while taking my hard work and success for granted. He said he understood why I had reported their crimes and didn't blame me for the consequences they faced. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. Harold seemed to understand that too much damage had been done for our relationship to be repaired. Instead, he simply wanted me to know that he recognized his mistakes and was proud of the strong, independent woman I had become, despite their poor parenting. I felt sad reading Harold's letter at "not guilty." It was too little too late to undo years of favoritism and the devastating betrayal of the lawsuit. I appreciated his acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but it didn't change the fact that he had been willing to destroy my life for Beverly's benefit. Some actions can't be undone with apologies. Agnes never reached out to apologize or take responsibility for her role in the family dysfunction. According to mutual acquaintances, she continued to blame me for their legal troubles and maintained that they had only been trying to help Beverly when they sued me. Her inability to accept accountability wasn't surprising given her history of enabling behavior. Beverly moved to a different state after completing her probation, apparently unable to handle living in a community where everyone knew about her fraud conviction. I heard through extended family that she was working a regular job and paying her debts, but I had no direct contact with her. The absence of her drama and manipulation was a gift to my mental health. Our wedding day was perfect in ways I had never imagined possible. Surrounded by Gerald's family, our close friends and supportive neighbors, I felt genuinely loved and celebrated for who I was, rather than criticized for what I wasn't. Janet served as my maid of honor, and Frank walked me down the aisle when I asked him to fill the father figure role. The ceremony took place in our backyard, under the oak tree Gerald and I had planted together the previous spring. The garden was in full bloom, filled with flowers we had chosen and nurtured together. Everything about the day represented growth, renewal, and the family we were creating based on choice rather than obligation. During our wedding reception, Frank gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. He talked about how Gerald had brought home a strong, intelligent woman who had faced incredible challenges with grace and dignity. He said I had shown them what real courage looked like by standing up for myself when it would have been easier to give in. Mary whispered to me during our mother-daughter dance that she was proud to call me her daughter, and grateful that I had brought so much joy to Gerald's life. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to have parents who were genuinely proud of my achievements, rather than resentful of my success. Our first year of marriage was everything I had hoped it would be. We supported each other's career goals, traveled to places we had always wanted to see, and began talking seriously about starting a family. The house that had once been a symbol of conflict became the foundation for our shared dreams. When I became pregnant with our first child, I was determined to break the generational patterns that had made my childhood so painful. I read books about healthy parenting, continued therapy to work through my own issues, and talked extensively with Gerald about the kind of parents we wanted to be. We decided that our children would never be compared to each other or treated as favorites based on their personalities or achievements. They would be loved, unconditionally supported in pursuing their own dreams, and taught that family means lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. Holding our daughter Emma for the first time, I felt a completeness I had never experienced before. This tiny person would grow up in a home filled with genuine love and support, never having to earn affection through performance or fear losing it through imperfection. She would know what healthy family relationships looked like from the very beginning. As I rocked Emma to sleep in the nursery, Gerald and I had painted together. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The house my parents had tried to take away had become the foundation for everything I had ever wanted: a loving marriage, a healthy family, and the security of knowing I was valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide for others. The greatest revenge against my parents' toxicity wasn't the criminal charges or financial consequences they faced. It was the life of joy and authenticity I built despite their attempts to control and diminish me. I had broken free from their dysfunction and created something beautiful in its place. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret reporting my parents' crimes or wish I had tried harder to maintain family relationships. The answer is always no. I gave them countless opportunities to treat me with basic respect and decency. They chose to sue me, harass me, and try to destroy my life instead. The family I was born into taught me what I didn't want to be. The family I created with Gerald showed me what love actually looks like. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from people who will never see your worth, even when those people happen to share your DNA. My parents tried to take my house because they thought they had the right to control my success and redistribute it according to their preferences. Instead, they lost everything they had built through fraud and deception, while I gained a life of integrity and genuine happiness. Justice isn't always dramatic, but it's always satisfying when it finally arrives. Looking out at the garden where Gerald is teaching Emma to plant flowers, I know I made the right choice in every difficult moment. This house, this family, this life of peace and authenticity is worth every battle I fought to protect it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and refusing to let toxic people steal your joy. If you're dealing with family members who try to control your success or manipulate you into sacrificing your dreams for their comfort, remember that you have the right to protect yourself and your achievements. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for your mental health and future happiness. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting your own well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize your own happiness over toxic family dynamics. Thank you so much for listening to my story and supporting this channel. Remember that you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your success rather than trying to steal it from you. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve, and don't let anyone convince you that you don't have the right to protect what you've earned through hard work and dedication.